let's dedicate a moment to discussing that elusive, often perplexing phenomenon we call happiness. It is the fundamental state of mind that drives every human endeavor, the ultimate prize everyone is pursuing, whether consciously or unconsciously. So great is this universal drive that an entire multi-billion-dollar industry has sprung up, a vast ecosystem of self-help gurus, retreats, and philosophical texts, all revolving around the promise of attaining lasting joy. Yet, happiness is anything but static. We often wrongly conceptualize it as a formula, the completion of step X and step Y, which guarantees the output Z, ensuring eternal bliss. That is a dangerous illusion. Happiness is not a commodity that can be purchased, nor is it a resource you can accumulate and safeguard like money stored in a bank account. Furthermore, its presence or absence has surprisingly little correlation with how substantial your financial portfolio is, what luxury vehicle you pilot, or the size and location of your residence. So, if it's neither static nor purchasable, how exactly does this thing we call happiness work? I have spent a considerable portion of my life as a committed happiness chaser, experimenting with countless avenues. I truly thought I had found the answer early on. The first discovery that seemed to unlock pure euphoria was alcohol. For a time, that fluid appeared to contain the very essence of the joy I sought. But the high is fleeting. While it may grant a few hours of artificial sparkle and dissolved anxiety, the days that follow are invariably an absolute emotional and physical wreckage, a truly horrific reckoning. I quickly realized this liquid promise was a deceptive trap. What other avenues did I explore? Romantic love. To be deeply, passionately in love is arguably one of the most intense, intoxicating highs a human being can possibly experience. There are moments when the intensity is so overwhelming that the entire world seems filtered through an impossible, rosy pink lens of optimism. However, as is often the case, the relationship eventually fractured and dissolved, and that initial, intoxicating romantic love curdled, transforming into its bitter counterpart, romantic hate. The highest of highs inevitably collapsed into the lowest, most painful depths. Clearly, this wasn't the permanent solution either. The same temporary spike and subsequent crash apply to almost every other quick hit of gratification. The pleasure derived from indulging in rich comfort food, the thrill of unwrapping the latest gaming console or digital adventure, or the brief respite found during an exotic vacation getaway. All these experiences are merely temporary moments of sensory joy and pleasure, fleeting dopamine hits that are simply not engineered to last. This concept of fleeting joy versus lasting happiness was brilliantly explored in a landmark psychological study conducted in 1978 by researchers Brickman, Coates, and Janoff-Bullman. They sought to determine if happiness was indeed relative and if major life events permanently shifted one's baseline emotional state. They tracked three distinctly different groups: recent lottery winners who experienced sudden, massive financial gain, recent victims of catastrophic accidents who suffered paralyzing injuries, and a general control group. The immediate, intuitive expectation would be that a lottery winner would remain exponentially happier than someone who, for instance, had just lost the use of their legs. You would also logically assume that a lottery winner would maintain a vastly superior emotional state compared to the non-lottery winning control group. However, the findings 1 year after these major life occurrences proved stunningly counterintuitive. The researchers discovered that the control group and the lottery winners were, statistically speaking, equally happy. The lottery winners were only marginally, and surprisingly briefly, happier than the paralyzed accident victims. What profound lesson does this study offer? It teaches us about hedonic adaptation, confirming that happiness is indeed relative and our emotional scales constantly reset. A person winning the lottery may feel unimaginable, ecstatic joy upon hearing about the windfall they are about to receive, and an accident victim may be absolutely devastated upon learning they are paralyzed for the remainder of their life. But as time passes, as the brain adjusts its set point, the levels of happiness for both groups inevitably gravitate toward each other and stabilize at an almost identical median level. Despite this evidence, I believe almost everyone would still choose winning the lottery over suffering the loss of a limb. Why? Most likely because of the sheer pleasure, comfort, and freedom that can be purchased with that wealth. But we must remember this critical distinction. Pleasure is not the same thing as enduring happiness. Centuries ago, Prince Siddhartha Gautama, who would become known as the Buddha, was also a relentless happiness seeker. Despite his unbelievable, inherited wealth and the protective walls of his palace, he was constantly plagued by a deep, gnawing sense of ongoing dissatisfaction. This motivated him to abruptly abandon his cushioned, overprotected life and confront the harsh, unvarnished sufferings of the world. Having been immersed in pleasure his entire life, an immersion that ultimately made him miserable, he decided to pivot radically in the opposite direction: asceticism. He subjected himself to extreme deprivations, starving himself to the point where he sustained himself on only a single grain of rice per day, and inflicted all manner of pain upon his own body. After years of these intense ascetic practices, he concluded that this path was equally fruitless and painful. It didn't work. Finally, he discovered a middle way, a balanced path achieved through dedicated meditation, which ultimately culminated in his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. Immersing himself in the extremes of pleasure did not yield happiness. Immersing himself in the extremes of pain did not yield happiness. But when he finally surrendered the striving, when he gave up the frantic chase for enlightenment, that state subtly crept up to him, transforming his suffering into a profound, enduring state of bliss. Happiness is profoundly like water. No matter how violently you shake it with the agitation of pleasure or how aggressively you stir it with the turmoil of pain, the liquid will always naturally try to return to a state of equilibrium and calmness. And it is within that deep stillness and calmness that we truly encounter bliss. Does this mean that we are all required to retreat and meditate silently beneath a tree to achieve lasting happiness? Not in the slightest. What it signifies is that we must cease the continuous trying to be happy, and instead, focus on the consistent doing. Meditation is an action, the intentional act of settling into the present moment, passively floating along with the unfolding universe. But so too is the committed act of working intensely on a complex project, the dedicated effort involved in writing the script for this very video, the focused attention required to solve an intricate puzzle, or the rhythmic flow experienced during a long-distance run. Being in the zone, or achieving that state of flow, as psychologists term it, is the true mechanism to tether yourself securely to the now. In that state, the pressures of the past and the anxieties of the future simply cease to matter. The same psychological reset applies whether you are poor, tragically paralyzed, or a soaring millionaire. The ultimate conclusion is clear. Happiness is not the goal. It is merely a natural byproduct of engaging fully with life. Don't try to be happy. Instead, do what you genuinely enjoy.